Hello, and welcome to Mapping the College Audition. I'm your host, Charlie Murphy, Director of MTCA. That's Musical Theater College Auditions. Check us out at mtca.com. And today we've got Andrew Ko from the University of Florida on the pod. For our newer listeners, it's another one of those college deep dive episodes where we explore the landscape of the college theater world and try to demystify this daunting audition process one episode at a time. I think you're really going to enjoy this episode. Andrew is really engaging and personable, and I think this program is one that isn't on everyone's radar, but you'll hear about some of the reasons that maybe it should be, from their extremely small cohorts and some really exciting personalized attention, and for anyone who lives in Florida, some incredible in-state tuition. So get it on your list if it's not already. And as we talk about in so many of these episodes, as we sit here in the midst of financial negotiation season for our seniors, those costs for schools are no joke. You know, the more options you have on your list that don't cost you an arm and a leg going in, the more leverage you're going to have to negotiate with at the end, for schools that you actually are going to attend, right? Like with so many aspects of this process, putting in that work early, doing that research, just keeps more paths, more options open to you on your own personal map that you're creating for yourselves. And we get a little bit into that in the takeaway, so I don't want to spoil that, but I talk a lot in the takeaway about this exact question. As for me, I am solo parenting a lot this month as Elizabeth is currently in tech and about to start an off-Broadway show. We're booked and blessed in the Murphy Stanley household with a number of back-to-back gigs, not all of which I can talk about at the moment. A little spoiler, but it's a good time. I guess it's not a spoiler. It's little, what are those called when you toss out a little teaser? That's what I'm going for, a teaser. I feel like there's just like so much of like, this is a tough industry kind of talk, and especially in leaner times, I think it gets talked about a lot, sort of just on social media and in the world, and understandably so. Of course, it's a really tough industry. But like we talk about in previous episode, I think you're often going to hear those stories of how hard it is to make it all work, especially when we're talking about kind of like work and family. And hopefully we're able to hold up some example of artists on this pod who do make it work, who do raise a family and live fulfilling lives and do all those things while being actively working artists. Elizabeth and I looked at each other this weekend after just a few days of rehearsals, catching a dinner on a dinner break. I drove Solvay down to catch her on her dinner break for 90 minutes. And we had a bunch of late night self-tapes. And we just looked at each other and we're like, we're crushing it. We're actually crushing it. This is hard and we're doing it, which is not always the story you hear from artists when they're balancing their family lives. So I'm telling you that story now. I'm sending love to all of our seniors as they continue to move toward their ultimate decisions with visits and negotiations, all that great stuff that they're dealing with right now. If you're not already signed up for our webinar next week on financial negotiations, on final decisions, please do so. We'll talk about financial negotiations, but the webinar title is Final Decisions, because we're going to help you try to reach towards your final decision. That's 2 Thursdays from now. And for our juniors and younger, we're doing a webinar tomorrow. That's this Thursday on standardized tests. So please check those out if you want some talk on how those standardized tests may be relevant in 2025, as well as some tips for you on those testing specifics. You will need those tests if you apply to the University of Florida, as is true for all Florida schools. So there you go. To all of you, I'm sending love and light. I'm hoping this spring brings you nothing but good things and that you enjoy this interview with Andrew Ko from the University of Florida. Well, we are so excited to be joined by Andrew Ko. Andrew has been on Broadway in things like Disney's Aladdin, the revival of Anything Goes with Sutton Foster. Nice work if you can get it, which I guess describes that show and is also a different show. He's been at the Old Globe. He's been at the Goodspeed Opera House, PCLO, Shakespeare Theatre of New Jersey, Stratford Shakespeare Festival, on television and stuff like The Iron Fist, The Mysteries of Laura, Blue Bloods, many others, and is currently a senior lecturer of musical theater and dance at the University of Florida, which is located in Gainesville, Florida. They take about 6 students a year, 24 max in the program. We'll talk about that small class size. They offer BFAs in MT, theater, and dance, as well as BAs. Andrew, welcome on the show. How are you feeling today?
Hey, Charlie, I'm great. Thanks for having us. This podcast is such an incredible resource for students and parents and families, and you're doing awesome work, and we're happy to be a part of it.
Oh, thanks, man. So nice to hear. And you're about to make it that much more incredible. You're going to add a little incredible dot into the
Yeah,
landscape that we're painting here. So I
yeah, awesome.
gave that little bio, but just anything you want to tell me in terms of your journey to the school. I mean, anyone watching the video will see a very young man still. I mean, in his prime of
Yes,
life,
yes,
you
yes.
see. But just your journey to the school in terms of fun facts about your life and what brought you here,
Yeah,
and
sure.
sort of where you are now.
Yeah, for sure. I always knew I stumbled into theater later in life. I didn't do it when I was young, really late in high school, and I stumbled into it knowing that I wanted to teach, direct, choreograph. Be on the creative side of the creative leadership side of the table. So, but I knew I would be a better teacher, a better director, a better choreographer if I kind of did it first and understood the industry and created a network and
Yep.
so that I could, relay that information in a more meaningful way. So I went to New York. New York was really good to me, and like you mentioned, I was lucky to do Broadway for about 10 years, and the time came that I was ready to really embrace that ultimate dream, which was to teach and direct and choreograph. So we
Yep.
started, my wife and kids and I, we started putting out some applications, and University of Florida came out. That was 7 years ago, and I came down here and just fell in love with the place. So it's really been an awesome home, a really supportive uh, group of students and faculty and colleagues, and I feel like we're doing some awesome work down here.
I love it. Well, let's get right into that then. So, talk to me about what is the ethos of the University of Florida, other than we've saw how small the program is. What kind of students do you feel like you're attracting? What does it mean to be a University of Florida student?
Yeah, I think one of the big things about school here is that the Wall Street Journal ranked UF as the #1 public university in the country last year. Forbes magazine called UF a new Ivy.
Mm-hmm.
So I think our students here are really, really exceptional. They're very bright. They're incredible problem solvers. They're tremendously independent. And our students are really involved across the university. There's athletics and student clubs and organizations. There's Greek life. They are proud members of our Gator Nation, which is not only upholding UF's incredible reputation and honoring those who came before, but also setting out to kind of conquer the world on their own path of greatness.
And what does that mean sort of curriculum wise in terms of, so let's start broad with mentioning there's real academics there. It was a new Ivy. I didn't even know that. My gosh, a new Ivy. We love.
Yeah, Forbes said it.
Forbes said it, not you, but we're repeating
right.
it. So I guess it's true. But with those academics, what does it look like as a BFA? Let's start with maybe a BFAMT. What does it look like in terms of like how many of your classes are in the theater world versus in potential abilities for minors or double majors, or just in other academic departments? How does that look in terms of the sort of balance of your academic load?
For sure. We have, we're a liberal arts school, so we have the gen eds that we have to take care of. And in general, that works out to maybe one gen ed per semester.
Yeah.
Many of our students, if not most or all, come into the school having knocked off several of those gen eds already via AP classes, IB classes, Cambridge classes, and the like. So, that just gives them a little more latitude to navigate around the curriculum and add maybe some extra classes that maybe are additional and not part of the required curriculum. But we're liberal arts, so we have your standard gen ed requirements, and then of course all the awesome theater classes that we offer.
Of this, obviously a small sample size, but of the 6, how many tend to maybe actually seek a minor if they have the APs? Do they try to work their academics into a minor, a non-artistic minor, or more of them, if they're adding classes, would it be, I'm adding an extra dance class, I'm adding something else artistic?
Yeah, for sure. Well, one of the coolest things that we have here at the University of Florida, and I think it's unique to the country, really, I'm not aware of any other school that's doing this, is we actually offer a Master's of Science in Management. It's essentially a Master's in Business that our students can do in conjunction with their BFA in musical theater. And every year, at least one of our BFA musical theater students, if not several, graduate with a BFA in musical theater and a Master's of Science in Management in 4 years.
Wow.
So that tends to be the additional degree, the additional hustle that our students tend to do here because it is such a incredible opportunity to get that master's while they're getting their BFA.
Yep. And what does management
really
mean? I mean, you don't mean like artistic management, like being a manager, but like
it's
you mean it's like a general business degree?
Yeah, it's a general business degree,
Uh-huh.
right? So it is built for degrees that are not in business.
Yep.
So it weaves its way into, in our case, into our BFA musical theater curriculum. And it's really applicable to the work we do, right? Because we always say that we're not going into this is not like starting a business. It is.
It is, right? You're the CEO of your own company. You need an entrepreneurship mindset and all those kind of things, and marketing.
Yep. So, yeah.
That's really cool. I love that. All right, so now let's zero in a little bit on the curriculum of the musical theater degree. So can you talk to me about what I'm getting over the 4 years in terms of acting, singing, dance training, all that kind of stuff?
Yeah. So we just did a big overhaul of our curriculum and put a brand spanking new one into place in 2022. So we're really excited about that. We have the standard kind of theater curriculum that you might imagine with acting progression, and we're a musical theater degree. So we have some piano classes and theory classes and theater history classes and the like. But there are 4 parts about our curriculum that I think are really worth highlighting. One, I really think one of the coolest things is how this new curriculum helps our students understand how to navigate the business aspects of our industry. Right away in the fall semester of a student's second year, I teach an audition and business management class where we really dive into what it means to do this for a career. I mean, the agents and the unions and the auditions and marketing and social media and financial management, all that. And we connect students to some of my behind the table Broadway network. And just this year we had industry professionals like we had Tara Rubin casting, who of course did The Outsiders and Back to the Future and Dear Evan Hansen and a million others. And we had talent agencies like The Mine and Tony nominated directors like Jess Stone, who did Water for Elephants, and Kimberly Akimbo. And we love that we can provide this class to our students early in their journey here, so that it's—
You said that's sophomore year.
Sophomore year, yeah.
That's really cool.
So it's not just an afterthought, right? Students, they're applying this business mindset as they move through their training here, and they have several years to continue cultivating those relationships with the industry professionals we introduce them to. And in this way, many of our students are already on the radar of some of our industry's top players when they graduate.
Yep.
Another cool part of our curriculum is choice. We have several electives. 3 areas of electives. We have a content generation elective where you can choose from playwriting, directing, comedy, improv. We have a skills and technique elective where you can choose from things like stage combat, some on-camera stuff, additional levels of voice and speech and dialects, somatics. And our third elective is theater studies. We have classes like Latin and U.S. Latinx theater, African American theater history, dramaturgy, and more. Can speak briefly about the dance part of the curriculum because that's kind of my specialty. I teach Broadway and tap classes here, and I use material direct from Broadway and the industry. And I like to introduce students to some of the choreographers that they will encounter when they enter the industry for themselves. We listen to interviews with them and explore their style of movement and learn about the show. And I like to say we're taking these industry professionals off this pedestal of unreachableness and kind of helping our students understand that they're just a person who is trying to be great at what they do.
Yep.
And by studying and learning about them, I feel like our students are better positioned to understand how they can help that choreographer and those creative teams succeed. And in turn, I think that makes them a really valuable team member.
Yeah.
In addition to my Broadway classes, the BFA MT students get to take dance with our dance majors as well. Yes. And those classes include ballet, modern, jazz, but we also have some amazing hip hop, West African, and Afro fusion classes as well.
Yep. Well, I was just going to ask, with such a small program, how the dance classes work with leveling, and then again, how do they work with pollinating with the dance department. So how does that work in terms of, if I come in as a more advanced dancer, I imagine I'm the sixth, we're not all the
Yeah.
exact same level. Am I taking class with my MTs the whole way? Am I taking class across the dance? How does that work?
Yeah, if it just related to dance, because we're so small and selective, that's one of the benefits we have is we can really craft an individual journey for each of those students. If we had 50 students coming in, it would be difficult. There would be more of a one size fits all for many. But in most cases, these students that we're bringing in, we have already known for several years via recruitment events, the festivals, conferences, and we know what kind of a dancer they are. We know what they could use to best move them forward. And because there's only 24 total, we have the time and the capacity to really put them into a class that fits their level and their experience. And some of those classes are with me, and some of those classes, like I mentioned, are with our dance faculty. So there's lots of crossover with our dance majors, which is awesome because our dance majors get to learn from our musical theater majors, and our musical theater majors get to learn from our dance majors.
And how does that pollinating work with the BFA theater majors too? Are you taking acting classes all together as the MTs? You take them separately? How does that work in the acting world?
Yeah, we have our BFA acting and our BFA musical theater degrees really move through the curriculum together mostly. So like the acting 1, acting 2, acting 3, acting 4, the musical theater majors and the acting majors take those classes together. After that point, the curriculum starts to kind of branch out, and musical theater jumps towards some of our music and theory and piano classes, and some more singing classes and acting through song classes and dance classes. But there's a lot of opportunities for our musical theater students and acting students to really learn together as they move through the curriculum.
Do you feel like, and it's always hard because I know these things are ever shifting, but in your 7 years there, is there a discipline that you feel like your students are kind of known for? Like, is UFL sort of known for graduating really strong dancers, strong singers, strong actors? I mean, is there one that leans more than the other?
Somebody asked me that question recently, like, what is your focus at the University of Florida? And I was like, our focus is employment. Yeah. So, we
fourth leg of the chair, the fourth leg of the stool is getting a job. Yeah.
Yeah. We try really hard to meet students where they are in their journey and help them develop who they are and what they want as best we can in every direction that we can.
Yep.
So I really don't think we are a dance school, or we are a vocal singing school, or we are an acting school. I really do feel like we're sending students in the industry with a mindset of how to create and sustain a career in the professional industry. Well,
that's a perfect parlay. You already were talking a little bit about the sophomore year in terms of some of these introductions of launch into the business concepts. Yeah. How does that continue into your senior year? So how am I launching into the business and meeting agents and, showcasing those kind of things? What does it look like to sort of, as I'm a senior and I'm looking to get those jobs, how am I being supported in those ways?
Yeah, well, I mean, in many ways, some of those relationships that we've already built via these master classes and workshops with guest artists who are coming in from Broadway, from TV, from the industry, they are already, as I mentioned, kind of cultivating these relationships with students. Yep. To the point where, like I said, they are on the radar. I have several casting directors in New York who are always asking me, "Hey, did this student graduate yet? Is this one, where is this one in this journey? Is this, and this is beginning, like we mentioned, in their sophomore year, they're starting to cultivate those relationships. We do have a showcase. And our showcase during COVID, we switched to virtual, as everybody did, and we found that it was really fruitful. So we've kept that into our in our showcase plan, but now we've returned to in person as well. So we have a virtual and a in-person showcase. For the virtual one, we hire professional videographers who produce and shoot and edit the digital showcase. It's awesome. And the in-person one, we're, grateful to have some pretty awesome agents and managers and directors and other industry professionals in attendance. Both of those showcases are facilitated by one of our faculty members, Tim Altmeyer, who is one of our professors with Broadway cred. He did Salome with Al Pacino and High with Kathleen Turner and several others. We're lucky to have someone like him at the helm with his Broadway network, plus my Broadway friends and the many other industry professionals that our faculty are connected to. So this is just, that showcase is really just one of the many pipelines to the industry that we have for our students.
I find that pipeline normally leads directly to New York. I know it's only 6, but do most of the 6 go right to New York? Do some stay in Florida for a period of time, work there? Do any go to Atlanta? How does that work in terms of
I would say most have their sights set on New York, and most end up going there. Some occasionally, I've encouraged some students to move to New York with a little bit of money in their pocket first. So some will stick around and do the cruise circuit or whatever it might be here in Florida locally, so that they can move to New York with some funds, which we all understand will make it a little bit easier to navigate the city as you start. But I think most of our students have their eyes set on New York and trying to make a career happen there.
Yep. Well, and that leads perfectly when we talk about a little bit of money. Let's talk about cost. And it also may speak a little toward some of the people who are in-state versus out-of-state. So what we found with cost per year tuition-wise, in-state was about $6,000 tuition. My gosh, fantastic. And then out-of-state was like $28,000. Does that mean that most of your students end up with coming from in-state or having some Florida connection?
Yeah, we have in addition to that very low in-state tuition, we have an incredible scholarship program in the state of Florida called Bright Futures.
Yep.
And depending on your academic standing, your GPA and some of your test scores in high school, many of our students that come in here get their entire tuition covered. So that $6,000 is zero. Some are even getting paid to come here. Out of state. So yes, the answer is, Charlie, that we most of our students are coming from.
If you can get paid to go to school, that sounds pretty good.
From in-state. But we are working on some sizable scholarship opportunities for out-of-state students that would roughly.
How does that work with out-of-state? So first, is there any, and I know it's always what you can tell me if there is any, but is there any chicanery or trickery that I can use to navigate my way into an in-state tuition as an out-of-state person? And then if not, how does it work in terms of academic scholarships, merit scholarships, talent, et cetera?
Yeah, sure. Well, we're kind of right on the precipice of making some awesome things happen here.
Let's jump. Let's just leap. Let's make them happen.
Yeah, I know. I'm trying.
Precipice.
Well,
let's
Charlie, we're working
take
on
the
leap. There is an opportunity that we're working on that would bring the out-of-state tuition number down from 28,000 to closer to that of the in-state tuition of around 6,300. We're really excited to make our program more affordable for students across the country. And that's really one of our focuses and our goals. So we're starting to try to expand our recruitment and our footprint and our reach. And I think one of the ways that we're doing that is kind of opening the doors financially here so that it is possible and for students from out of state.
I love it. Well, and for those who don't know what the University of Florida just sort of is like as an institution, we sort of mentioned the academic side of it. You said members of Gator Nation. Like, what does that mean for somebody who would be coming here, who's like, I don't know I didn't grow up in Florida. I don't know what that means. Like, what is that kind of campus experience and campus life like?
Yeah, it's incredible, right? We're a small, selective musical theater program of just 24 students, like we said, but we are in the middle of a gigantic public university. Our students get to have the big school college experience with things like the football games in our 88,000 seat stadium and tons of other NCAA Division I sports. There's a significant sorority and fraternity life here with like 66 chapters across campus. We're home to an AI supercomputer it's been named one of the most powerful in the world.
What does it do? Write songs for you? It composes musicals? I mean, how's that helping the kids, the musical theater people?
It does my taxes. And
there you go. Not bad.
Too, our Gator Nation here, we are located right in the heart of North Central Florida. So that means things like beaches, the Gulf, the Atlantic Ocean, Disney World, Universal Studios are all really just a short drive away. It's incredible. We have a ton of student activities and organizations. I mean, there's over 1,000.
Yeah.
And some of them are as crazy as knitting, skydiving, cricket.
Wait, skydiving sounds a lot more crazy than cricket to me, but yeah.
Yeah, well, you never know. You never know.
Or
but
knitting. Yeah.
there are literally 1,000 student organizations that are happening
That's
here.
awesome.
So that, outside of our school of theater and dance, there's lots of ways for students to get involved and
are the
be a part of
MTs really so are they painting their faces and going to football games? Are they doing Greek
Oh,
life? Are they more insular into their experience? No, they really spread around the campus.
Yeah. I mean, the football games, the students get a season ticket pass for like $100. It works out to like $10 a ticket. It's crazy. They're certainly way more expensive than that for anybody else who wants to go. So many of our students on Saturdays, the entire campus, really the entire town, city closes down because of the massive football games that happen.
Yep.
So yeah, they're for sure doing that. We do have some students who participate in sororities and fraternities. It's an added responsibility and a lot of time and a lot of work.
Yeah.
And some students figure out that it's too much, but there's certainly some students who have really found a home in that Greek life and are able to make it happen in addition to their artistic studies.
Yep. I love it. All right. Well, so we talked about some of the sort of the maybe positive cultural aspects of Florida. What about, from some of our families, especially more and more as we're thinking about like politics and sending their kids off. If I'm from the Northeast and I'm thinking about sending my kid off to a red state, but especially Florida that has some specific sort of state politics. How do you find that affecting your students, if it does or doesn't, in terms of them coming in?
Yeah, we're really intentional about the types of lessons and the types of opportunities and the environment that we create for our students here. We're doing the best that we can to really make our School of Theater and Dance a place where our students have a voice, where our students feel supported and heard. We do things like from across our degrees and areas, students have been given several seats on our committees. So we have like our season selection committee, which not only has students from each degree represented, but the whole submission process itself is open to all students, which kind of makes sure that our students' voices are heard and considered in all the shows that we produce. We do things like for every show we produce, we create this violence and intimacy document that outlines any possible sensitive material that we'd ask from students, and we give them the opportunity to decline any role that they're offered for whatever reason. We hold regular town hall meetings where students can raise issues directly to faculty and administration. And we really, I consider it an honor actually to be here in Florida and, navigating the challenges that the political climate might be presenting to us, because I feel like we are a really special group of artists and future performers in this industry that have tremendous potential to make an impact. And we're doing the type of work that I think really helps those students realize what they can accomplish, what they can do in the world, and really be a catalyst for change in the future.
That's a very smart answer, and I think it makes a lot of sense in some ways that if you're in a place that's not a bubble, that you have the more ability to actually affect change, or actually kind of understand what that would be like to interact with different people, as opposed something we talk about. We're about to do a webinar next week with all of our parents about like, how do you send your kids off to school? And we're thinking about that of like, it's not the worst thing to introduce some obstacles at some point. It's like you want safety, but like if there's no obstacles at all, then how do you? There's a balance there of going, what's my kid ready for in terms of encountering the real world? It's not all going to be a beautiful bubble,
Yeah, and we're still doing the work that we feel is right. We produced The Prom last year, and like we're not shying away from the type of work that we feel is important for the future.
Yep, I love it. All right, we'll take a quick break. On the back end, we'll talk about the audition and admission process. So we're back in a flash. Woo-hoo. All right, we are back with Andrew Ko, and we're going to talk a little bit about the audition and admission process. So let's start off broad, and I would just love to see, like, what are you looking for in an audition, right? Obviously, you're doing some level of culling that's going to make this person's into a yes pile, this person's into a no pile, this person's somewhere in between, or however you do
Right.
that. What are you kind of looking for and evaluating to go, this feels like this might be a University of Florida student?
Yeah, I think our prospective students really boil down into three categories. I think the first is we want to make sure that the students really want to do this. Because we're such a small program with just 6, we really want to make sure that all 6 of those students are really ready to pursue this at the level that we all know is requisite to make a career happen. So that's number one. Do you really want to hustle and climb this mountain toward, a career on stage in the performing arts? The second is we want to make sure that the students, we have faculty who have had highly successful careers of their own on Broadway and national tours and TV and all the things. And so we understand what it means to have a career and to be able to sustain that career over many years. And we know that means a lot of hard work. So that's the second part of it about it, right? Is this student ready to work really hard and is really focused on pursuing this particular career? But the third one is probably the most important, and that's, are you a good person? We're super lucky that because we only take 6, we can spend so much time really getting to know these students throughout the recruitment process, several years before we begin the actual auditioning with them. And we get to know them, their high school teachers, we get to know their parents, we get to know them on a level that is much deeper than just the pre-screens that come peeling in. And that helps us make sure that the people we bring in contribute to the kind of kind, supportive, loving atmosphere that we have here in our School of Theater and Dance.
So of the 3 factors, talent is not on the board whatsoever. They don't have to be at all good as an actor, singer, dancer.
Well, yes, but like I mentioned earlier that I came from not having done this at all. So when I was auditioning for colleges in high school, I would not have cast me. I would not have hired me. I was so green. I'd never done an audition. But then fast forward, I was on Broadway for 10 years and did TV. And so I think me in particular, I'm uniquely able to look at someone and go, do you want to do this? Are you ready to work hard? And are you a great person? Because if you have that brewing inside of you, then we can make magic happen here. That's our job, to give you the skills and move you through. If you're ready to work hard, I'm living proof that you can get there from zero.
And you're saying even if there's not 0 factor of what is a capacity from a skill set perspective, you're saying those factors weigh so much more heavily of, if you're willing to work hard, whatever capacity you have, you'll make the most of it. I think that makes a lot of sense. I'd love to just talk about, like, because again, from the parent perspective, from the student perspective, as you're thinking about doing an audition, putting an audition together, maybe we understand good person and how we might get that in an interview to some extent of, like, do I seem like a good person or not? How are you sniffing for passion or drive or grit or whatever, those first 2 qualities? Like, you said something that you think you can sense, like, how as a student, if I'm like, I think I have a lot of passion, I think I am willing to work hard, I know this about myself, I want it, how am I showing that to you in an audition experience?
For sure. Now, it's actually one of the bits of advice that I give students whenever I go on these recruitment trips. And I encourage students, even as young as freshmen in high school, not just waiting till you're seniors, but as soon as you are starting to think, maybe I want to do theater, to find ways to connect with the schools that you're interested in pursuing, right? So that by the time those students reach us and with their pre-screens, their 90-second pre-screen videos, we already know who they are. We've worked with them. We've seen their personality. We see their focus. They've reached out to us a bunch of times. And so we see that they are knocking on the door, being like, I want this, let's go. So those, tangible ways are, if it's a school that's close to you and you find out that those teachers are teaching master classes anywhere or recruitment classes or at a festival, go. take the class.
Yep.
After the class, go shake their hand, say, this is my name. I'm interested in your school, and I just want to introduce you. Go, if it's a campus that's close by or even not, go to their campus and see one of their shows. Hang out afterwards and meet the students when they come out in the lobby or the stage door, shake their hand and say, hey, I'm really interested in this school. You were incredible in the show. And, I'm hoping to learn a little bit more. Follow the school's social media if they have it, connect with them there. And then, every school has a faculty page. Go to those faculty websites, look at some of those faculty, find faculty whose credits and experience kind of identify with a path that you'd hope to take for yourself, and email them. Hey, it's Andrew. I think I'm really impressed with your school and what you've accomplished, and I hope to accomplish that myself someday. I just want to introduce myself. Here's my headshot, my resume. I'm only a sophomore, but I hope to see you again many times in the coming years.
Yep.
And that type of just politely knocking on the door and being like, hey, I'm here and I want this. That's it. I mean, that student will totally move to the front of our queue when we know that they want it and they're prepared to get up off the couch and go get it.
I think it's really good advice in terms of, the sort of the relationships aspect of the business, especially, I think it's specific to some schools more than others in terms of just the size and number of applicants and what's realistic. So we can talk about that certainly. But in terms of the audition itself, is there anything that you are continuing to look for? Let's say it's a student that didn't happen to do that for you, but who does come across your, you see a pre-screen, you go, this kid's talented. I'm interested. Well, let's see what's going on here. How then in the audition experience, whether it's the interview, whether it's the way they walk in the room, whether it's material choice, how are you seeing some of those things in the audition experience itself when they are a senior?
Yeah, I think, this is a difficult to make tangible, but the idea of potential, right? We see a spark in one particular area, right? It even could be something like, wow, they are really comfortable in their own skin.
Yeah.
Oh my gosh, amazing. That person is incredible being themselves. They maybe don't have the skills yet, but I can tell that once they develop those, they're going to walk into an audition room and kill it. Yeah. Or wow, that person is an incredible dancer. Holy cow. All right. Not quite not quite there as a singer or actor yet, maybe, but we can work on that.
Yeah.
So, ultimately, Charlie, I think it's making sure that those students truly embrace what they have to bring to the table and not compare themselves to anyone else's pre-screens or anyone else that they see in the room. I always say to students, hit your home runs. Do the material and the work and the things that represent yourself the best. Mm-hmm. Get us interested, and then we can start narrowing it down and getting toward, can you do this specific style? Are you versatile to do this, X, Y, and Z? Mm-hmm. Just hit your home runs. Do the things that are your I'm doing sports analogies here, but do your ESPN highlight reel, right? Sure. Do the big things that make us go, wow, that person is interesting. And like I said, that could be just your confidence in yourself as a person walking in the room.
No, that's such great advice. And I love to kind of, because especially you mentioned this idea of meeting people earlier as, sophomores or whatever, that you're making that connection kind of before the audition. How does that for you then carry forward through the audition experience? We're right now in March, when so many of our students, they may be on wait lists. They may be in the pool of consideration is the new sort of popular term where we're like, what does that mean? Is that an answer? We got an answer. But in that continuing to communicate, what does that look like for you? Let's say I'm someone who did reach out to you as a junior. I saw you at a master class. I did audition for you. How do you like that continued conversation? Obviously, they're not emailing you once a week, but for for 2 years. But what is that? How do you like to be communicated with in terms of continuing through the audition process?
For us at the University of Florida, email is great. Social media is great. Our Instagram, UF Musical Theater, is a great place. I manage that and create that content, so you can reach me there.
People are DMing you. Students are DMing you on Instagram. You're okay with that?
Yeah, once we get to this
2025 world, that's the first time we've heard that in the podcast. DM my professor on Instagram. Okay, continue. Yeah.
Well, I'll tangent just for a second, Charlie. It's that's how students are communicating. So we want to make sure that we are up with what the latest way that students communicate and interact with the world. And that is one of the ways. I can send an email, but they might not check that for 2 weeks.
Ain't that the
truth? But their DM, they're going to check that.
Ain't that the truth?
So
I'll never forget Elizabeth. This was a couple years ago. We were like redoing our website. I was so proud of it. We're like really working on them. She goes, "Your website? Who cares about what's your Instagram look like?" I was like, "Oh
Yeah.
no,
Oh,
websites aren't
no.
even important anymore." My God.
Yeah. Well, you just got to link the Instagram on the website.
That's it, exactly.
But getting back on track, the audition process. Once we, maybe I can just start at the top of our process and get to this point.
Yep.
I can be clear. We have a pre-screen. We see several hundred, and then from that we invite 30 students to our in-person callback here at the University of Florida.
Yep.
And from that in-person callback day, we start to invite an even smaller list of students to shadow and observe classes with us.
Still not having gotten a result yet. They're not into school yet.
Not yet. Not into school yet. And then, then we navigate the admissions process as many schools do, where we have our artistic acceptance and our academic acceptance, right? Yeah. So we're very lucky because we have just 6 students to navigate. The subsequent conversations that we start to have at this point can be very individual and can be really based. We don't have like a copy and paste template email that goes out to 100 people saying you're in consideration, you're on a wait list. We're like directly talking to a student, sometimes on Instagram, sometimes via text, sometimes via email, just saying, "Hey, we love you. We want to let you know that we are really interested and, X, Y, and Z." So some students will get an artistic offer, before academic comes out. Sometimes they'll be like, "Listen, we're going to reserve a spot for you in our program. It's contingent on academic acceptance, but we're going to reserve it for you because we think you're awesome." Some will not get it till after academic decisions come out. So it's really on an individual basis.
These are amazing specifics. Not only did you get us back on track, but now you're moving us forward with some great specifics of things I should have been asking you. You're both hosting and guesting the show. It's unbelievable.
Let's go.
I want to zero in on two of those avenues. So first, let's talk about the academics, meaning so the academic acceptance happens separately, but are you aware? Do you look at the academic application? Do you see grades and SATs and those kind of things? And then, so you have some awareness of this is like a likely candidate, not as likely. Are you reading essays and stuff like that from the academic application? Or are you saying, "Hey, that's academics to deal with. I'm worried about the artistic side of it"?
Yeah, our Office of Admissions really handles the academic part of those applications. We are aware of GPAs and test scores, but our decisions artistically are based artistically. We're really grateful, though, to have developed an incredible relationship with our admissions department, and they understand now that our students' potential to succeed in this world is not something that GPAs and test scores can fully represent, right? So our admissions has been awesome at helping support the students who artistically we feel have a lot of potential to succeed in. So they consider their artistic merit and their artistic potential as well.
Basically meaning you could be a little bit below the Ivy League standard of a UFL
absolutely.
to be able to get into the school.
And that's an important thing that we've been making sure that the world knows is, UF has a proud reputation of really, really high academic standards to get in. I think last year it was like an average of a 4.5 GPA, a 1420 SAT, a 32 ACT. It's crazy. But like I said, our relationship with admissions, we're so grateful to them, and that they have been helping us move students who do not meet those numbers still find their way into the University of Florida. And for those students who are our finalists, Charlie, we are able to have those conversations with admissions and help move them through.
It's, I think, a particularly important conversation for our juniors and sophomores and freshmen listeners to listen to in terms of, because if they're looking at potentially doing Florida schools, that might be one of the only reasons they need to take the SATs if other schools don't require it. And so for them to go, "I don't think I'm going to get a 1420, some people might be scared away. But if they go, "But if I got, I don't know, 1350 or 1300 and go, that might be enough for me to go, all right, I'll give it a shot. Then maybe I will look at a UFL."
Yeah. And Charlie, I mean, we have had students with not incredible GPAs and test scores. We've been able to, and they've succeeded incredibly here.
Yep.
right? Because just really recognize that those numbers are not indicative of
Well,
what type of student that they could potentially be.
we always talk about the different kinds of intelligence. I feel like I've overused my classmate Will Brill because he just won a Tony Award, but like this was
Yeah,
not a strong academic student. I mean, but he's one of the smartest people you've ever met. Like he's incredibly
absolutely.
smart actor. You see him on stage, you're like, this is a genius, and but also
Yeah,
not just like an artistic genius. He's also very, very smart. But school wasn't his thing. He was not going to write a term paper and do a good job. But that doesn't mean he's not capable of being a really smart person in the world. Okay, wait.
absolutely.
I'm going to go back and zero in on the other thing you mentioned, which I think is kind of unique and interesting, though not completely unique, which is, I think, why I want to zero in on it. So you have the pre-screen, pretty small cut. It looks like now we're 10, 15% of the people are getting, I mean, pretty big cut,
Yeah,
meaning a small percentage are passing. Now you got the 30 that you see, which is, we'll call that the callback. And then it sounds like there's kind of an informal secondary callback where they're shadowing. So that maybe now where you're sensing for some, to the question of the passion, the drive, the grit, the good person. Now they're kind of still auditioning. Sometimes, we do this with our actors. We do like an ensemble call class to be like, what is it to take class as an audition? To be like, how do you show yourself as a human being, as a student? So what does that process look like in terms of, and I guess also, is that a required step? If someone doesn't do that, does that mean, hey, I'm not going to necessarily get
no. Yeah, it's not required. It's just an opportunity for them. Usually by that point in the audition process, we know so much about these students already from behind the table. Really, those shadow and observation days are for them.
Yeah.
They're for us too. We want to see, all right, what is it actually spending a long day with you? And we have interactions with our students and our faculty, and like, what is it like when you're not just interacting for 5 minutes in a room? Like, what is it like when you're with them for 5 hours in a day?
Yep.
But ultimately, those shadow and observation days are for students to see if this is the home that they want to be in, because that's just as important to us. Like I mentioned earlier, we try to really create this place that's supportive and kind and has a family atmosphere where students are thrilled and happy to be here. So we want to make sure, like, hey, come check it out. This is what we are, and this is what we do, and this is how we think you could fit into this equation. We want to make sure that this is what you want, and you'd be happy here. So those kind of informal observation days are really kind of for both sides of the equation.
Yep, I love it. And I'll probably do a little bit more on this in a takeaway, but I'm just sort of flagging for our students that at other schools where the results may come out more formally, this might be the kind of thing where you're still in a pool of consideration or a wait list where you do that visit. And there is the same benefit in that version of going, let's get to know you and you get to know us, and who knows it's not always as black and white in this industry as like, you're a 5 out of 10, you're a 7 out of 10, you're
Absolutely.
in. It's like, of course, we're talking about people here. I'd love to talk a little bit, when you talk about 24 students total, 6 in a class, like, what do you think about as you're filling out a class? I mean, I often talk about like stuff like gender balance and height balance and racial diversity and size balance. And when you're talking about 6 students, that is such a small sample size in each class. Like, you cannot literally get all the things that you would want to have in 6 people because there's just not enough people. But are you thinking about that kind of, balance of diversity and all the meanings of the word diversity? Are you thinking about that across the 24 students? Are you thinking about across the 6? How does it factor into just the way that you look at, and I also mean stuff like sopranos and tenors and, all the different, like, how do you look at that as you look at just 6 students?
Yeah, I mean, it really boils back to those 3 things, Charlie. I mean, there have been years that we've taken, 4 female identifying students and 2 male identifying students. There's some years where we're 3 and 3. There's some, I mean, we really are trying most intently to bring in students who we think want to be here, are ready to work hard, have the potential to succeed, and are kind, wonderful people that will continue to make, our 8 a.m. to 10 p.m. Adventures here wonderful.
And if that led you in a direction where a class was more monolithic, then that just means it's going to change your season. You'll go, hey, we got 6 women, or we got that's a possibility for you.
Yeah, we've been working hard at not bringing in students into our program to cast a show.
Right.
We're trying to bring in students into our program who have tremendous potential to make an impact in the industry and have wonderful, fruitful careers.
Yeah.
So And we're lucky that our shows that we produce here are really open to all students
Yeah.
at the University of Florida. So we're careful to choose shows that we know will be able to authentically cast and with our student body. But we are definitely not bringing in students to just satisfy the cast for a particular show.
Totally.
Yeah.
Yeah. And how does you mentioned sort of expanding audition landscape of what we may be on the precipice of, but what does the audition landscape look like for you now? So the audition right now, the only time that you're going to see someone is live on campus. Do you do online anything in terms of seeing people?
Sometimes, I mean, we have that pre-screen, which they'll come in from that. But then, with the observation, with the in-person callback here at UF, sometimes students, we've had some out-of-state students who are among that callback list.
Yeah.
And for those who can't afford the time or the money to come here, we always are happy to arrange a Zoom interview and time with them.
Yeah. But what about those earlier recruiting? So you mentioned sort of, hey, I meet some people as sophomores, whether it's because you're doing a masterclass individually. Yeah. What does UF's recruiting look like in terms of meeting a student before? What theater festivals and thespian things? Okay. What does that look like in terms of what your interactions are there?
Yeah, it's some of the stuff I love doing the most here. I mean, my colleague Matt Morgan and I, who's our voice teacher, he and I travel to maybe 10 to 20 high schools throughout each year here in Florida. And we just offer free master classes and talk to students about the industry and kind of talk to them about the college audition process. So we visit some of those schools repeatedly. So like I said, we're developing student relationships with those students from the time they're freshman or sophomore. Yeah. Florida also has an incredible theater education infrastructure. We have a conference called the Florida Theater Conference, which happens in the fall, which is kind of like a sort of regional a competition for, I think it lands somewhere about 2,500 to 3,000 students, high school students that come and they show their one acts and their solos, and there's master classes. And I teach at in a lot of those master classes and interact with the students there. Yep. And then the big one is the State Thespian Festival, which is actually coming up in like 3 days.
Yes.
That's in Tampa. And that's actually the largest high school theater festival in the world. It's like 10,000 high school students. And those students are competing again with their pieces that they've been working on in school, whether that be their one acts or their choreography pieces or their duets. But also there's a ton of master classes and workshops that are available to these students from teachers in the area, from national outside of Florida schools, from people come down from Broadway to teach classes and everything. So those are the big ways that we are interacting with our students, and we see thousands and thousands of students via that method every year.
Yep, I love it. I love this, Zach. You mentioned some of this, but as we move to wrapping up, you're on the precipice of some things. You talked about ways in which you want to grow in, it seems like, in reputation, but also grow in terms of your outreach outward into the country. What does that look like? I don't know if that means also grow in size in terms of numbers, or if staying at 6 students in class. What do you see yourself, 10 years from now, if we're still here, what do we see UF looking like that's different than how it looks now?
Yeah, I think the 6 students that we bring in every year and the 24 student size of our program is unique and special and awesome. And I don't know that we are going to actively try to change that anytime soon. As hard as it is every year to only take 6 when we see so many incredible students, I think that those numbers give us the chance to really give our students something that they can't get anywhere else.
Yep.
So I think that program is probably going to stay close to that size. I think one of the big goals that we have, as we were talking about, is really just expanding our reach in this way. We're hopeful to not only be considered one of the premier musical theater programs in the state of Florida, but eventually among the big ones across the country.
Yep.
As we continue to graduate more and more students who are finding work on Broadway and in national tours on TV, and along with our incredible faculty who continue to be really active in the professional industry, we're excited to be kind of joining those networks together and creating kind of a mega network of artistic theatrical gators.
Yep.
We share our successes with each other. We help each other make meaningful impacts in our theaters, in our classrooms, in our communities. So that's really what's been really cool to see is our growing Gator Nation
Yep.
across the world.
It's one of the ways, people always talk about they want an intimate programming. The idea of having a small program is so lovely. I mean, six is very small, and there may be some issues of being six too, also of being one of six, I should say. But
Yeah.
also in terms of the growing alumni network, it's one of those things where what you actually care about as a student is like who's working per capita. But that's the actual important number, but nobody tracks that. So like when you're going up against the NYUs of the world who are graduating
Right.
400 students, it's hard to be in as many Broadway bios as some of the schools that really are just graduating so much more tonnage, even if your per capita hit is just as good, or
Yeah,
cool.
absolutely. We're lucky though. I mean, we had some of our graduates, George Salazar, who was in Be More Chill. He's one of the I think I just learned that he's one of the faces of or voices of one of the seven dwarves in the new Snow White movie.
Oh, I know.
We have Valerie.
You'd rather be a voice of a dwarf than a face of a dwarf. Thank you. If you have
I guess. I don't know if they did his. I don't know how. I haven't seen it yet. Valerie Torres Rosario understudied Philippa Sue as Guinevere in Camelot. Yes. Yael Reich was in Hadestown. We have Trevor Wayne, who's currently in the Ponyboy understudy in Outsiders. Lauren Stone is in the national tour of Book of Mormon, which actually just came through Gainesville like 2 weeks ago, so we got to see him.
So cool.
It's really awesome. We're really growing our network, and it's cool to see the impact that our students are having on this industry that we all love so much.
And what about, as a smaller school, I think sometimes parents fear now, especially it's becoming more and more a fear in the post-U arts world, just like the finances of it all. Other schools also, especially state-funded universities, sometimes have financial cuts. How does your finances look? Of course, you can only speak to what you know, but how do the finances look in terms of your sort of financial future?
Yeah. Well, I mean, that's one of the reasons why I came here. When I was auditioning, I wasn't auditioning, I was interviewing, because you interview for a job, you audition for theater.
You have to do 16 bars? Yeah.
Yeah. When I was interviewing, I was in New York, and when we were interviewing at all these different schools, I had several offers and several opportunities to pursue this dream of teaching, directing, and choreographing in various different schools. But the reason why I chose UF is because the arrow was pointing up. At the time, the UF was bringing in, I think, 500 new faculty, and there was all this money pouring into the school to grow. As I mentioned earlier, Wall Street Journal had us categorized as the number one public university in the country. So those types of conversations really mean that UF isn't going anywhere. And that's one of the big reasons why we chose to come here, is because the arrow just keeps pointing up, not only for the school, but for the UF as a whole, but for our School of Theater and Dance and being a part of the greater UF family.
I love it. All right. My last question for you is just to speak a little bit toward the parents in this process. So, for those who, and, a lot of the people listening right now might be juniors and sophomores starting to form their list. Some people will be seniors who are, now kind of making their final decisions. But, as a parent in this process, what advice do you have from having seen students and families go through this, of how a parent can best support their child through this?
Yeah. I'm a parent myself. I have a 10-year-old and a 13-year-old, so I will be going down this path soon. I don't know if theater's going to happen for them, but I get it. One of the things that I do tell parents is what I mentioned, Charlie, earlier, with regard to helping your children connect with and reach out to those schools, right? Be more than just that 90-second pre-screen. So if your son or daughter is interested in pursuing theater, you can help them facilitate those conversations so they become more than just a video. Yeah. Another thing I think is important to families, obviously, is cost and money and student loan debt. So for parents who might need some evidence, I always say, remember that you don't have to go to the $100,000 a year schools to make your dreams come true.
Yep.
I'm living proof of that. I went to a smaller university in my home state of Wisconsin, and I accrued next to no student loan debt, and then spent 10 years on Broadway.
Yep.
So I think for parents, send your students my way. I'll tell them I'll tell them my story. But
Totally.
if those students can find a school with professors that you connect with, and an environment that you think that the student thinks that they can work hard in, have fun in, then that's a ticket.
Yeah.
That you can make anything happen. So I think there's a lot of pressure with the top 10 schools in the country, got to go do this. Well, so that student loan debt is very, very, very real. And especially starting off in this industry with mountains of student loan debt, it just makes the pursuit difficult. You are at a point where you want to say yes to an opportunity that doesn't pay very much money, but you have the chance to work with X, Y, and Z producers, directors, casting directors, but you can't do it because you have all the student loan debt and you can't give up your survival job and whatever it might be. So again, I think for parents, it's just to help your students understand. And like I said, send them my way, that you don't have to go to a specific school to make your dreams come true.
It's such good advice, and it really echoes what Telly the Young, who was our first artist guest on the pod, who went to Carnegie Mellon in 20 years.
I know Telly. Telly's a friend, and he's actually going to be talking with our students in about a week. So
hey, now there you go. One of the stories told on the pod was he goes, "I just paid off my student loans after 20 years of working in this industry and all those years of Broadway, and that is about as successful as one could hope to be of all those Broadway shows." And you would have worked in Disney's Aladdin potentially with Telly. I'm seeing it.
Yeah, that's how I know Telly.
There you go. We're pointing to the Aladdin poster that's behind you.
Charlie, do you know Dennis Stowe?
No.
Dennis is one of those 12 Broadway show people. He's currently the Jafar in Aladdin, and that's how I knew him. He's the same situation as Telly, where he had like 10 successful Broadway shows. Those are good paychecks and they weren't short running shows. They were long running shows. And he was close to, I think he was, I don't remember his age, but he was maybe in his 40s when he was finally paid off his student loan debt.
And theoretically, that's like a success story. So that means the debt didn't weigh them down too much. But then you look back and you go, but that's a down payment on a house. That's a lot of things that I could have had something else. It's the opportunity cost of going, if I wasn't paying that off, what wealth could I have accrued, or those things
absolutely.
that people think about as they get older in life.
It's real money that you have to pay back. And I think more and more parents and students are starting to catch wind of that. And I think that's smart and good future planning.
There's no doubt about it. All right. Well, we know the Andrew Ko. We can DM him directly on the Instagrams of the world. Just reach out, slide into the DMs, and see what happens.
You're so hip, Charlie. It's awesome.
Oh, yeah. I know all the terms. I know all the lingo. Really appreciate your time, Andrew. Thanks so much for coming on the show.
Yeah, man. Thanks for all that you do.
Yes. The first and the last time on this podcast that I'm going to be accused of being hip, of all things. Hip, my God. But I hope you enjoyed that interview with Andrew. It was nice because we had some mutual connections going in. He had worked at the theater that I spent a lot of time in the pandemic sheltering in. So shout out to Rocky Mountain Rep. He also knew Elizabeth and Leo previously. So it just makes the rapport that much easier going into an interview situation. I think you might have felt a little bit of that rapport. I certainly felt it on my end. Lots of takeaways today. Sometimes I just can't help myself. And this is one of those times. I have a lot of takeaways, but probably because it was an engaging and interesting conversation that, led to a lot of things. We have talked about size before. We talk about size of programs, all the different versions of size. But for our newer listeners, just noting again, those positives and negatives when you talk about a class that is so small. And this is like as small as it gets. When you talk about 6 in a class, 24 in the whole school, of course, you got to note the difference between cohort size and the size of individual classes, because that can really vary. But these classes could have non-MT actors and dance majors in them, as we talked about. But with all of those things, I don't think there's a definitive answer to what size is right. Like, I don't think it's like the Goldilocks of this is too small, this is too big, this is just right. I think it's different from person to person. But we know you don't want any actual classes, meaning like the literal classes themselves, with too many students. And we also know there absolutely are advantages to being smaller in terms of the personalized attention that Andrew mentions, right? We know there's a personalized attention you can get at a smaller program that you just could not get at a much larger program. But you also never know about the opportunity costs of the student you didn't get to meet because you were in a class of 6 instead of a class of 20, right? To say in general, smaller is better, I would generally agree with that. In that I think an MT class of 20 is preferable than an MT class of 200, to me personally, right? But where exactly is that line of too small? I think that's for each person to decide for themselves. I do think for many people, they would say 12 is even better than 20 because 12 is smaller than 20, more personalized attention. I'll bet some of those people would say that 6 is better than 12. But is 2 better than 6, right? I don't know exactly where those people would draw the line. And I'll bet some people would draw it above 12. Some people would say 18 feels just right to me, right? I don't think there's a singular answer. Some people like a bigger class. They may say, I love a class of 30. I love a class of 60. I really love that I have so many different people that I can meet, right? And of course, as we talk about the sort of cross-pollination of different disciplines, different majors really at school, each school will feel differently in terms of like how you relate to those 6 or how you relate maybe to the 24 across the school as more sort of intra-class pollination happens. But this is exactly the kind of thing that I think is really helpful to feel out on a visit. What does it actually feel like at that school with those specific different kinds of majors, with the different classes of freshmen, sophomore, juniors, et cetera? So you can talk to the other students there and just see what feels right to you, what feels good for you in terms of class size, right? I'll also just make a quick note, which I have mentioned before on the pod, is that when you hear a school say, we are truly even across disciplines, which I think is a normal answer, and I think it's a truthful answer, that tends to mean that this program is going to be dance heavier compared to other schools. That's, of course, not to say that's a rule that applies in every case, right? But I'll say more schools tend to say, we really emphasize acting above all, for instance, or, we really believe in the music part of music theater. Maybe we're a BM and there's extra music classes that you're going to take. Whereas very few schools will say, it's all about the dance. That's what we weigh the heaviest, right? Now, of course, some schools do have specific dance concentrations. Sometimes we call those like MTD degrees, where you can get extra dance or you can get a dance minor. But when we're talking about the general BFA, I'm just noting that, the idea of saying we're really even across all 3, that does tend to mean that comparatively, there's more dance emphasis than at an average school, than at a mean school, right? That's not to say that they aren't telling you the truth about their evenness of emphasis. In fact, I think they are. But I'm just, to be clear, saying that in the fact that they're not lopsided means that they are going to be dance heavier than the rest of the population, right? I hope that makes sense, right? Basically, it's just to say, in our 100-some school-centric episodes, no schools have said that dance is our biggest focus or anything like that, right? Whereas multiple schools have said that comparable answer, with acting being the biggest focus, or in some version of singing or music or musicianship being their biggest focus. Okay, I've waited long enough to get into the juicy part, which is just to talk about Andrew's advice about making that connection early with a school. I said it a bit in the episode, but I do want to say I tend to think that is really great advice. This is certainly a relationships business across the board. And if you know you're interested in a school early on, there is nothing wrong with trying to reach out and make a connection if it's easy and low cost for you to do. For example, we gave the example in the episode, for a kid in Florida who meets Andrew at a thespian festival to then do follow-up emails because he gave out his contact information, absolutely, that is just good business practice, right? And of course, we see it with our own MTCA faculty masterclasses, how making those early connections can absolutely pay off for students. Again, we're human beings. This is a business built on relationships. If you know somebody, you're going to carry that information forward. But that said, I want to give the big caveat that this tends to be much more relevant at smaller schools with smaller total auditioning populations. You heard the numbers that Andrew gave. While the school like a University of Florida is still very competitive by the percentages, you're talking about a factor of 10 less when it comes to auditionees than some of the schools that get the most applications. So a factor of 10, meaning 10 times more at some other schools, right? So just to say in general, it is not standard that you would have a pre-established relationships with all of your auditioning schools. It's just not how it goes. It's not at all the expectation that would happen before you go in for the most competitive schools. As of this recording, shout out to MTCA, we do have 9 students currently accepted into Carnegie Mellon's incoming class, with a handful more on the wait list, so that could go up from 9. But as of now, it's 9. And of those 9, I don't think any of them had the kind of pre-established relationship that Andrew is talking about, right? Where they had contact with a professor at the school as a sophomore, as a freshman, or some of the things, Andrew's talking about knowing them for years, right? Some of them may have met faculty at our summer master classes in August. But again, that's August of their senior year. So as they're really into the process already, right? And certainly not all of the admitted students of our admitted 9 participate in the master class at all. And of course, there are other students at Carnegie Mellon who didn't participate in those master classes, right? So just to say that while I think this advice in general is good, and I really like the idea of being proactive, Andrew says, get up off the couch, right? Using some Jeff Probst language we love, right? And I think there's nothing wrong with being fearless and, make contact with your schools, do reach out, be bold, right? The other side of that is please don't feel like you're at a disadvantage if you don't do that, right? And for those schools that are getting 2,500, 3,000 applications, most of those students will be meeting the professor for the first time in the audition. And most of the students who are getting in will be meeting the professor for the first time in the audition. And the students who do that are going to have every bit as good a chance to get in from there, right? So it's not about trying to like leverage early access as a way to sneak in the door, even though, again, that's not to dissuade anyone from making those connections wherever you can find them if you're inspired to do so. And again, you can feel me kind of going back and forth. If that feels like a slippery answer, yes, I think you're right. It's a bit slippery, but I'm always a bit conflicted because I do think Andrew's advice is really good in general in terms of business practice, but I always want to fight back against the perception that this industry is all about access or all about nepotism or who can write the right recommendation letter. And when I say this industry, I mean the college audition industry. There is plenty of nepotism, of course, in showbiz if you're talking about like Hollywood or whatever, right? But it's just not what it's about when you talk about college auditions in the vast, vast majority of cases when it comes to auditioning for theater programs, right? Regular listeners will know I like to use the phrase subjective meritocracy. I think I should get that copyrighted, but it's really true. Subjective meritocracy. The merit is in large part subjective when you're talking about artistic merit, and it's going to vary from beholder to beholder. But in almost all cases, these professors are accepting the students that they will think are the best fit for the program on whatever rubric they're using. That's a full stop. They're going to accept the best fits from the students they see for their program based on their own personal artistic rubric. And that's not to say that someone like Andrew isn't using that pre-existing information, like you mentioned, or that other professors won't do the same if they remember a student from a master class or a summer program or wherever they've seen them. But I will say, if that professor thinks that someone who walked in fresh is a better fit for their program, they will choose that fresh person over the student that they've seen before. They're not going to say to themselves, well, this person has done 3 masterclass with me. So, I'm going to reward them with admission as sort of a thank you for doing 3 masterclasses, even though I think this other candidate is better. That is not the way this works. Again, all of which is to say, and I'm being a bit repetitive here, I think it's good advice from Andrew, but a relatively unique situation for UFL in the size of their classes and the way that they go about recruiting, right? Even though we've heard on the podcast other schools, we've heard other episodes where people are talking about, going to local thespian festivals or local high schools. I believe like Ohio University talked about that, right? And they would do that kind of active recruiting. I think that is smart and creative on the part of those schools to do that. And in those cases, especially, it is smart for the student to engage in the way Andrew is encouraging you to do. If contact is made from them for you to contact back, that's the same business practice that all of you are using now after your auditions, and it's smart to do so. But when you're talking about the majority of schools at the top of the majority of people's lists, that kind of recruiting is not the standard. So most of the schools will not have already reached out to you in a high school and will not have already met you. The standard is the normal pre-screen and callback process, with this being the primary and very often the first interaction that's happening would be the pre-screen and then a live callback audition. That's the first time that student and faculty are going to meet in the vast majority of cases. And again, I think it gets to the broader question, which I really enjoyed Andrew's honesty and ambition in talking about trying to recruit more nationally. That's one of the UFL's goals, right? Trying to make additional scholarships happen to make that a more realistic possibility for them. Very smart, right? But obviously, the current recruiting practices being more local is part of why his answer is true, and that longer recruiting process being possible for them, right? And that longer a bit of contact, that's true for them, but not for every school. Though again, I think good advice for schools that recruit on a more local level across the board, not just UFL, right? One of the reasons I ask every school that question of where their students come from and where they end up is that I do think it generally helps a program's reputation when they have that broader reach geographically, right? You'll absolutely have those hidden gems that recruit only locally, many of whom you've heard on this very podcast, hidden gems that recruit primarily locally. But when you're trying to make that next leap, many of them know they need to recruit more nationally and internationally to make that happen. Wait, again, that's not to say there's not great value going to that local school that's going to give you a great education, especially when you're talking about that amazing tuition cost. But I think in terms of a program's ambition, there is a difference between the schools that have students from all over the world and schools that have more local talent, which I think that's just like generally true across colleges, across any kind of educational program, but it definitely holds true for musical theater as well. Also, did you catch that tidbit about visiting schools where you're on a wait list or within the pool of consideration, right? Do you hear that? Just to be clear, I want to broaden that to beyond UFL. This is a totally acceptable thing to ask to do. For any school, as I record this in late March, where you're in any kind of maybe pile, whether that's a wait list, an alternate, a priority hold, a pool of consideration, whatever they call it, it is totally reasonable to ask if you can visit the school, if that school would be high on your list were you to get in. Now, depending on your other options, you may decide it's not worth the expense of a visit if you have other great options that are already a yes. And if this school isn't any particularly higher on your list for you, so you don't necessarily have to do it. I'm not saying you need to visit all of your waitlist schools, but because the waitlist can turn into a yes throughout the next month and beyond, into May and into June and even farther, it can turn into a yes for, it can happen in August, right? You might not have another opportunity to visit while school is still in session where you to get in, right? So to take that opportunity now to place that school in the appropriate rank order in your mind is really smart. That said, I do want to say it's worth factoring in the psychology if you think it will break you if you were to visit and fall deeper in love and the wait list still doesn't happen, which of course could happen, right? I do hear that. And I think it's something that should be attended to for all, at least thought about. And maybe that's the reason why you wouldn't do it, right? In general, I tend to lean more toward the side of strategy than in taking care of my own psyche, right? Maybe that's my own problem, right? But to each their own in terms of how they care for themselves. But it's worth just noting, of course, that could be a reality that you do visit, you fall deeper in love, and it doesn't happen. That said, I will say it also can have a positive effect on your chances to get in if you visit a waitlist school and continue to express that interest, right? In the same way that we talk about demonstrated interest with a visit before you audition does not have a large effect. When you talk about, I visited as a sophomore, that's not going to have a large effect. Again, for the most part, for audition-based schools and for the most competitive schools, in some cases, smaller cases, it could have different effect. But in general, we're talking about the most competitive schools, we're talking about audition-based schools. It's not about demonstrated interest, right? Your audition is your interest. They know you're interested and you've sent a pre-screen and all those kind of things. I would say that once you're placed on a wait list and they're communicating with you or any kind of communication they're making with you, that your continued communication and continuing to demonstrate your interest is now paramount, right? And that's not to say, again, that a visit is necessary. A visit is not necessary, but a visit is one of the ways in which you're able to continue to show interest. You, of course, could do this via email. Just say, I'm still continue to be interested. When they say, you want to stay on the wait list? You want to say, yes, if you do want to stay on the wait list. And you might want to do even more than that. And we've talked about that a lot in MTCA webinars, and we'll talk about it more. But if you're in a place where I would drop everything and say yes to this school if it were to happen. If you have that school that you go, this is my number one, and if the waitlist were to happen, I would say yes to this school. And you can sit across the table physically from someone and say that, it can absolutely help you get in. That is a great demonstration of interest, right? And like so many things in this process, again, it's hard because it's not a guarantee of success. You could sit across the table, you could say that, and they go, thank you so much, right? But it could be a help for you in combination with, of course, the luck that you need in the right other people opening up spots for you. So when you're talking about a wait list, it's not like they're just waiting to let you into open spots. Spots have to open up for you to be the one to let in. But once that spot's opened up, could the fact that you demonstrated more interest or could what you're doing in communicating with them continuing, could that bump you up the wait list? Of course, right? That's the human nature of them knowing that, especially them knowing, hey, you actually would say yes as we get later in the process. Okay, can I switch from that good concrete advice to waffle on something else? I want to give you a little bit more equivocation. I know you all love it when I give a nuanced read on something, when so many of you just want me to tell you how it is. I hear that a lot of parents go, wait, is it this way or is it this way? I don't want to hear it varies from school to school, but it does vary from school to school. I'll just say in general, I know it's comforting to have people just tell you how it is. Believe me, I get it, especially from a parenting perspective. Like, what is the right answer? What should I say or do, right? I would be generally very suspicious of the voices in this industry and any industry who tell you things with that level of surety, right? This is a complex world. It's a complex industry. It's a complex business with a lot of different paths and a lot of different answers. And very few of them are truly black and white. So if you can't find the part of you that says like, well, that's also true too. I feel this way, but also there's this side of it too. Then you're just not understanding this ever evolving industry at a deeper level. But okay, the thing I want to waffle on a bit that I wanted to add in, at least present the other side of, is just that conversation about debt, about taking on large amounts of debt. Because listen, I firmly believe in the point that Telly made, or that Andrew makes here, or that so many others on the pod have made. Josh Grizzetti made it very passionately, as well as many others, about being wary of taking on mountains of debt in order to attend a theater school, right? I think it's a really good point. There's a lot of truth to that statement. And it's also a really smart sales pitch from a lesser known school that they can say, I can offer you a very comparable education for 1/10 of the price, right? In this case, the in-state tuition at UFL is like 1/10 of some of these other schools, right? And to make that point, that you really want to sit and think about what the price difference might be. If we're talking about, in some cases, $50,000 difference over 4 years, what is $200,000? Or even $25,000 difference over 4 years, half of that, that's $100,000. We talked about that is the down payment on a house, or it's multiple years of rent that could make your life a lot easier if you're between gigs. So really smart to understand the value of that money. And we talked about different ways that parents have tried to make those decisions with their kids to go, you have this amount of money. Do you want to spend it on this or do you want to spend it on this? However, I do just want to say, I am sensitive to the fact that Attila Young is making that point, having had the benefit of a Carnegie Mellon education and the reputation that goes with it for his career. Just like any do as I say, not as I do argument, we should take it with a grain of salt, because who knows if he would have had the career he had, which has enabled him to now pay back all of that debt, and it was a lot of debt, without taking the path that he took, right? That's of course not to say in Telly's case, or really anyone's case, that I think the school gave him this career, or that it wouldn't have been possible to achieve the same results, or even maybe better with a different education. But the truth is, we'll never know, right? What's unquestionably true is there are tons of successful people currently on Broadway, currently in big movies, all over the highest level of our industry, who went to lesser known schools or didn't get any formal training at all, right? That is undoubtedly true. So we can say for certain, you don't need to attend one of those most competitive schools in order to be a success, without a doubt. But it's also true when you look at the percentages of people who have achieved higher success, there is a huge statistically significant boost from having gone to one of the most competitive programs. It's impossible to say exactly what that percentage is, because we talked about before. What metrics would you use? They would have to be really wacky. I mean, would you use total Broadway gigs? Would you use total money earned? Neither of those feel at all like the right measuring sticks in terms of what we really care about when you talk about success, right? But you don't even need metrics to notice the effect. That's the point. It is totally visible with the naked eye. And in conversation with any in the industry, they're going to tell you, you're going to see more graduates out of the more selective, more competitive programs who are succeeding per capita. Which, of course, is not to say that the more competitive programs are always most expensive. I'm talking about those two tend to be linked, but it's not always the case, right? But if you're somebody who's listening and you have a great, most competitive program that you love, which is cheap for you, you can stop listening to this takeaway and just celebrate. You probably don't need this conversation for your decision-making process. But for those who are in the other situation, back to it, just to toss into this conversation, if you love statistics and you love trying to make logical deductions out of ineffable artistic decisions, as I do, is that, of course, the fact that the people have more success out of well-known programs is in and of itself not necessarily the most relevant factor for you to decide, because those human beings aren't you. Not only might you fare differently in different environments than the statistical norm, but when you're making these kind of selections, you're working against the selection bias of your previous peers. So again, the fact that more previous Telly Leungs chose Carnegie Mellon is undoubtedly a huge factor in why those previous Telly Leungs were successful. But Telly would still be Telly entering into a different program, phenomenally talented and able to get into Carnegie Mellon as he was, right? Which, of course, would likely give him a greater chance of success than a non-Telly person, regardless of what school he went. Right. So, of course, all of this is impossible to go back and actually calculate. And I'm doing this a bit tongue in cheek, but I just want to say, if you're sitting there struggling with this decision right now, and you've listened to all the college episodes of this podcast, I believe you've been oversampled with the opinion that it doesn't make any sense to spend money on a 4-year BFA, or maybe it doesn't make any sense to spend a lot of money or to potentially make a sacrifice for yourself personally to attend a competitive 4-year BFA, which again, I think there's a valid and important kernel at the bottom of that, but it is also in the vested interest of the people who are saying it to say that, right? You do not hear the expensive schools saying, hey, you should spend a lot of money to go here because we're worth it, because it's just not a great marketing message. But in some cases, I think there is some truth to that argument, potentially, depending on how much money and which schools we're talking about, right? For those who listen to the Matt Scott artist episode, he really walks you through his decision-making. So maybe if you have the decision, I'd go back and listen to that. He walked you through his decision-making in deciding to attend CMU, and it was his most expensive option. He had a single mom raising multiple kids. It was a huge expense for their family. They didn't end up paying full price. You'll hear the way he kind of negotiated and how he made it possible for himself. But it was not a small sacrifice for his family in making it work. And to his estimation, to their estimation, I think it was his uncle's estimation or someone who did it, it was ultimately worth it. Now, again, just like Telly, Matt is a super talented and bright guy. There's a selection bias there. He totally could have been successful with a different educational path. But I just want to make sure for those of you who are stuck with this, and if you're stuck with this decision and you've made it this deep in this interminable takeaway, that line of thinking is also represented on the college episodes too. You are not a fool for considering the pros of spending money on college either, if you're wrestling with a tough decision or might be in the near future. Okay, let's call that a wrap on another episode of Mapping the College Audition, produced by Meghan Cordier and Kelly Prendergast. If you can't believe I had a whole other takeaway written down, I did. It was long, and I'm hearing the Wrap It Up music playing in my head in the background. I think Meghan is just going to start like weaving the outro music directly into my takeaways if I don't start making them shorter. But we're going to save that other one for another time. For those who enjoyed these immediate takeaways and this episode as a whole, you know what to do. It's a rating and review on your podcast platform of choice. Make sure you're subscribed there so you don't miss an episode, and you're following us on social media. It's at Mapping the College Audition on Instagram, where you'll see the beautiful work of Jordan Rice and catch some snippets from our past conversations. And for all of you, please check us out at MTCA.com so you don't miss this month's webinars and to see all that is going on in terms of how we can help you with your individual college prep. To my young artists out there mapping their journeys, trust that you are enough for the right school exactly as you are right now. Now keep striving. Catch you next week.